Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. Excuse me, and thank you for joining this radio audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about an economic theory that's been around for a while, 50 plus years. It's called the law of diminishing returns, or more accurately, the law of diminishing marginal returns. It was first conceived, as I understand it, at least by Professor Samuelson, and it also is known, colloquially, I guess, as the theory of economic elasticity. Now, the reason I mention this is if you look at the pronouncements of all the mass migrant intake countries, whether they be Australia or Britain, United States, Canada, and so on, Western Europe, they all cite variously, but frequently, they all cite that mass migration is fantastic for economic growth. Economic growth, all these skills that are coming. These aren't illiterate peasants that are coming. They're all fucking rocket scientists, and they're adding to the economy. They're making us all rich. Look at the economic growth, the growth. We'd have had recessions, and goodness knows what if we didn't have all these illiterate third world peasants coming into the West. Now, at the same time, but not announced and done much more quietly, these Western governments, again, quietly in the back room, they concede that between 3 and 5% of these migrants actually are any economic use to the West at all. The rest are just parasites and freeloaders. But I just want to talk about, so it's understood how this law of diminishing returns, again, also known as economic elasticity, how it applies and how we need to understand that even though there is, because when you get masses of people coming, you get more government expenditure, the price of real estate and rent goes up. Now, in the typical measurements of GDP, which is purports to be an indicator of wealth, and by the way, at one time was, but it's now been perverted like so many things by the globalists. There's just become another machine or mechanism or device as to how to tell lies. But when you get more people coming in, they're buying more things. They're given taxpayer money to go and buy groceries at the shop. The rents are going up because of extra demand. House prices go up. In some countries where real estate price rises are just rampant, as much as a third, or getting close to a third of the GDP measurement, is actually increasing real estate prices. Now, increasing real estate prices means a lot of artificial demand, but also a lot of money being borrowed. So the financial sector thinks, well, gee, that's not such a bad thing. They're making their money on these things, but if we look at actual economic growth, that is productive growth, all we're seeing is GDP is being underpinned by increased government expenditure, money being spent on all these illiterate peasants coming in, and debt being acquired through artificial increases in rent and buying a house, you're going on a mortgage. For example, the amount of people that are nuking their credit, debt out on their credit cards just to cover the day-to-day essentials of life, paying the rent, buying the groceries, and so on. That's counted as economic growth, but no, it's not. It's actually a negative expenditure. These people can't engage in productive work sufficiently to be able to pay the bills and the debts and so on. So it's actually negative, although it's recorded as economic growth. So I just want to sort of make that house price increases are recorded as economic growth, but they're not. They're artificial imposition in cost of living terms on the populace. So now let's look at this, how this applies to the law of diminishing returns and economic elasticity. And I'll use a simple thing, which I think was part of Samuelson's initial explanation back in the day. Let's suppose you've got a farmer this is a simple explanation, of course, but let's suppose you've got a farmer that's growing, I don't know, wheat or something. Now he's working on his own, and he has a lot of work for one guy. He can't finish planting the crops because there's only himself. some of the seeds spoil before he's got time to get it into the ground. Then the birds and the crows come along and eat the crops, so he can't. He doesn't get not many, only half the crops he planted actually make it through. He doesn't manage to harvest them all. Some of those spoil. The stuff that he does gather, it's in storage, but he doesn't have time to go to the markets to arrange to sell the crops. So some of that spoils as well. So in the end, he's only got He's only got 2 or 3 bushels of wheat to sell, in spite of he's been busting his ass all year. So he thinks, okay, well, I've got to hire a guy or bring in a partner or something, because while I'm planting the crop, this guy can look after the administration of it, or he can scare away the crows so they don't eat the seeds and so on. Or I can till more of the field, because I could only till half the field last time. We could only plant half the field. So I only get 2 guys. So even though he only does 2 bushels with one, when there's 2 of them, it increases to 6 bushels. So the net gain, but by hiring another guy, is the 2 bushels that the first guy made. The next guy also makes 2 bushels, but then there's 2 additional bushels. So they've actually become much more productive. So by employing more resources, they're producing more, not creating more debt, not artificially pushing up prices, but they're producing more. They are more productive as a result of this. So the guy, the original owner, thinks, well, hey, that's not too bad. I might employ another guy. Now they're starting to get quite efficient, with the 3 guys, and instead of at the end of the year, they've actually made an additional 4 bushels now, or 6 bushels. So not only are they producing 2 bushels each, they've now got quite a substantial surplus. So the 3 guys, the one guy was 2 bushels, 2 guys are 6 bushels, but 3 guys is 12 bushels. So much more productive. So they look at this and go, wow, okay, we're doing really good here. Now, if we get a guy who can sort of fertilize the ground and he spends more time tilling the field, so it's ready for crop planting, and so then they go to and that one more guy, the 4th guy. Now they're at 24 bushels. I mean, they're kicking ass now. They're really producing a lot. Each added worker is creating much higher productive output of wheat. So there are 4 guys. So what if we employ a 5th guy? So all right then. So they all agree. Yeah. Hey, but when the 5th guy comes, they only produce another 3 bushels. So for the 5th guy, the returns are now starting to diminish. They're not producing. They're producing more, but not much more. So it costs 2 bushels, if you like, to really employ somebody. So now this other guy but the 5th guy is only producing 1 additional bushel. But they have a meeting and say, well, why don't we hire 6th guy, another 6th one? By the time they hire the 6th guy, then they're actually not producing. The 6th guy only produces an additional 2 bushels. So there's no net gain to them at all. And then they employ a 7th guy. And now they're actually going into reverse, because they're tripping over each other. They're having, industrial relations problems. They're spending too much time squabbling over which crop this or over the seasonal timing of planting or so. So they're squabbling all the time and tripping over each other and arguing and this sort of thing. So now by employing the 7th guy, they're actually producing 1 bushel less than they did previously. So this is what the law of diminishing returns is. You reach a certain point where you're not actually producing anymore. You're actually going to reverse. You're producing less. Now, you're not producing less necessarily. You may be producing more, but such a slight amount more that by the time you divide it up with the additional workers you bring in, everyone is now producing less and receiving less of a reward as a consequence. Now, this is the effect of mass migration. I mean, and there's two things here. One is in the mass migration to the West, which is fully orchestrated by the globalists, by the way. In this mass migration, a very small number of people are actually doing anything productive. That they, say to Australia as a case in point, a very small number actually speak competent English. A very small number have qualifications that are recognised. They come from horrendously corrupt countries where everything is acquired through a corrupt payment to somebody. And they have no qualms about it. That's just how business is done there. And they think it rather strange that we have independent examinations to test what people can and can't do. And you have to pass the test, or you can't be a doctor or can't be a rocket scientist. They're staggered by this in these third world countries. They just can't comprehend a merit-based system in any way. It's just beyond their comprehension. So there's a very small number of people coming in, between 3 and 5%. This is of the adults, of course, and so the rest are just parasites. But the effect they have in the vast numbers is to artificially push up rents, artificially push up accommodation prices, and so on, and to go artificially push up taxation, expenditure, these sorts of things, which does count. Wrongly, in my view, as economic growth. So if it's from the indigenous population and their purchasing power, the real estate prices are reflected through that, then it is economic growth. But if it's mass buying of offshore investors and mass movements of people, then it's not economic growth. Nothing even remotely like it. So why would they count that? And it's quite disingenuous and I think quite deceitful to claim it's economic growth when it's nothing of the sort. So when we look at the West today, the West is now, in my view, in a death spiral of diminishing economic returns, that even though there is an extra bushel of wheat being made for every million or 500,000, whatever, of illiterate peasant migrants that are brought in, that when you divide those extra workers up, the extra population up, we're all actually getting less. And I would argue that the standard of living in the West has fallen just in the last 25 years by easily a third, if not more, as a consequence of this. But the government can just say, well, look at the economic growth. I mean, fuck, look, it's got to be a good thing, economic growth. That's not economic growth at all. And it's economic growth being bought at the expense of unproductive pursuits, mis-expenditure of taxation, revenues, and of course, runaway increasing debt. That's really just a debt that's created within a Ponzi scheme, in effect. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.